The auditorium holds silence the way old churches hold prayer. Dust moves through the afternoon light like something sacred, each particle suspended in the slanted beams that cut through the high windows. I stand on the stage where I have stood 1,000 times before, but today the familiar wooden boards beneath my feet feel different. Uncertain. The folding chairs in the audience sit in neat rows, empty except for the weight of memory they seem to carry. I hold the playbill in my hands, its edges soft with age, the paper yellowed in a way that speaks of 15 years hidden in desk drawers and coat pockets. The fold line down the middle has worn thin from being opened and closed too many times. Much Ado About Nothing, it reads in faded burgundy letters. Spring 2009. I trace the words with my thumb and remember when they were printed fresh, when the ink was sharp and the future felt like something we could script. Emma and Marcus are fumbling through their blocking again. Two 17-year-olds trying to navigate the tender choreography of young love, their voices echoing in the empty space as they work through the garden scene. She laughs when he stumbles over Benedict's longer speeches, and he grins back with the kind of easy affection that makes my chest tight. They reach the moment where the kiss should happen, where Shakespeare wrote tenderness into the margins of comedy, and they both freeze. Emma touches her lips uncertainly. Marcus runs his hand through his hair and looks to me with the helpless expression of someone who has never been asked to make love believable. I understand. I remember being 17 and thinking that every emotion had to be performed, that authenticity was something you could practice until it became real. I step forward to guide them through it, moving between the painted flats that will soon become Leonardo's garden. The set pieces lean against the back wall, half-finished, and waiting for the designer's vision to bring them to life. I am explaining how a stage kiss should feel natural, how the audience needs to believe in the love even if the actors are still discovering it themselves. When I hear the auditorium door open with its familiar creak, the sound makes me turn, and time splits open like a seam. Julian stands in the doorway at the back of the auditorium, backlit by the fluorescent hallway lights. For a moment he is just a silhouette, a figure that could be anyone, but I know the shape of him. I know the way he carries his shoulders, slightly uneven from years of hunching over drawing tables. I know the careful way he moves through space, as if he is always measuring distances. He is leaner than I remember, his dark hair shorter, touched with gray at the temples. He wears slate gray wool and carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to inhabit his own skin. We have not spoken in nearly 15 years. Emma and Marcus notice my distraction and follow my gaze. The spell of rehearsal breaks, and suddenly we are just four people in an auditorium where one of us does not belong, or perhaps belongs too much. Julian walks down the center aisle with measured steps, his hands in his pockets, and I realize that part of me has been waiting for this moment since the day he left. I dismiss the students with a nod, my voice steadier than I expected when I tell them we will pick up tomorrow where we left off. They gather their backpacks and scripts, whispering to each other as teenagers do, already spinning stories about the mysterious visitor. Emma glances back at me with concern, but I wave her on. The auditorium door closes behind them with a soft thud, leaving Julian and me alone with the dust and the silence and the weight of everything we have never said. He stops at the foot of the stage, looking up at me with eyes that are exactly the same shade of brown they were when we were 18. He has always been able to see too much, to read the spaces between words where I hide my truth. Even now, even after all this time, I feel transparent under his gaze. "You are still directing plays," he says, and his voice carries the same quiet warmth I remember, but there is something careful in it now. Something that was not there before. "You are still showing up late," I reply, but there is no anger in it. I meant it to sound casual, perhaps even playful, but instead it comes out trembling. The old rhythm between us, the easy back and forth that used to fill the spaces between classes and rehearsals, feels fragile now, like something we might break if we are not careful. Julian reaches into his jacket and produces a playbill identical to the one in my hands. The same yellowed paper, the same worn fold line. He opens it, and I see his handwriting in the margins, notes he made during rehearsal in blue ink that has faded to gray. Act 3, Scene I, he reads aloud. "Practice again." With feeling. The words hit me like a physical thing, stealing my breath. I remember him writing that note. Remember watching his careful script fill the white space beside Hero's monologue. I remember thinking that his handwriting was beautiful, that everything he touched seemed more intentional than the way other people moved through the world. The memory comes without warning, vivid and immediate. Two teenage boys on this same stage, the lights dimmed to half, the auditorium empty except for the janitor's distant vacuum in the hallway. We were running lines, just the two of us, because Julian always stayed late to work on the set pieces and I always found reasons to stay with him. The scene called for Benedict and Beatrice to almost kiss, to come close enough that the audience would hold its breath, and then pull away with Shakespeare's perfect timing. But that night, Julian did not pull away. I can still feel it. The hesitation, the moment when time became elastic. The way his hand found the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. The softness of his mouth, the taste of the peppermint gum he always chewed. The way he whispered my name like it was something precious he had been saving. And then, when we broke apart, the look in his eyes. Not regret. Not surprise. Just recognition. As if he had been waiting his whole life for that moment to arrive. We stood there in the stage lights, breathing hard, and Julian asked if we could try it again. Not for the scene, he said. Not for Shakespeare. Just for us. I never answered. I grabbed my jacket and left him standing there, and we never talked about it. Not the next day. Not ever. Back in the present, I feel the familiar weight of my coat pocket, the playbill I have carried for 15 years like a talisman, like evidence of something I have never been able to name. My voice comes out smaller than I intended when I speak. We were just practicing, I say. Julian looks at me for a long moment, and I see something shift in his expression. The careful distance he has maintained since walking through the door cracks just slightly, revealing the boy I used to know underneath the man he has become. His voice is soft but direct when he answers. You say that like it made it untrue. The words hang in the air between us, and I feel 15 years collapse into nothing. I am 18 again, terrified and desperate and in love with someone I could never have. I am 35, married, with a daughter and a mortgage and a life built on the careful architecture of being someone else. I am both and neither, standing on a stage where everything began and ended and perhaps, and possibly, might begin again. Julian folds his playbill and slips it back into his jacket. The gesture is so familiar it makes my heart race. He has always been economical with movement, precise in the way he inhabits space. I want to ask him why he kept it, why he came back, why he is looking at me like he can see straight through to the part of myself I have spent decades learning to hide. Instead, I step back from the edge of the stage, putting distance between us that feels both necessary and impossible to bear. The dust continues to move through the light, and somewhere in the building a door closes, the sound echoing through the empty hallways. Julian watches me retreat, and I see something like understanding pass across his face. He has always known when to push and when to wait. The silence stretches between us, full of everything we are not saying, and I realize that this moment, this collision of past and present, is the thing I have been both dreading and hoping for since the day I learned he was coming back to town. I study his face in the harsh stage lights, cataloging the changes that 15 years have carved into his features. The laugh lines around his eyes are deeper now, etched by experiences I was not part of. There is a small scar near his left temple that I do not remember, a thin white line that speaks of some accident or injury that happened while I was building my careful life elsewhere. His hands, when he reaches up to run them through his hair in a gesture I recognize from 18 years old, show the calluses of someone who still works with his hands, who still creates beauty from raw materials. The knowledge that he has lived an entire life without me, that he has accumulated scars and experiences and probably loves that I know nothing about, sits heavy in my chest. When we were teenagers, I thought I knew everything about him. The way he took his coffee, black with just a touch of sugar. The fact that he drew constantly, sketching in the margins of his textbooks and on napkins during lunch. How he hummed without realizing it when he was concentrating, usually fragments of whatever song had been on the radio that morning. Now he is a stranger wearing the face of the boy I loved, and I do not know whether the silence between us feels more like a chasm or a bridge. The auditorium around us holds the particular stillness that comes after students have departed, when a building settles into its emptier self. The heating system clicks on with a distant rumble, and somewhere in the walls water moves through old pipes with the sound of gentle percussion. These are the sounds of institutional spaces in the late afternoon, familiar to anyone who has spent their adult life in schools, but today they feel different. Weighted with significance, as if the building itself is holding its breath. Julian moves slightly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, In the small motion breaks whatever spell has been holding us in place. Narrow composition notebooks filled with my careful handwriting, thoughts and observations I was too afraid to speak aloud. I have not looked at these pages in over a decade, but as I open the first notebook, the words transport me instantly back to 17 years old and drowning in feelings I had no language to describe. October 15th, 2008. Julian stayed after rehearsal again today to work on the backdrop. I helped him carry paint cans from the art room, and he thanked me by buying me coffee from the vending machine. We sat in the empty cafeteria for an hour talking about colleges and whether we would stay in touch after graduation. He said he hoped we would always be friends. I wanted to tell him that friendship feels too small a word for what I feel when I look at him, but I just nodded and agreed. Sometimes I think he sees right through me, and sometimes I think I am invisible to him. I do not know which possibility scares me more. The handwriting is mine, but feels foreign, the earnestness of youth preserved in blue ink on lined paper. I turn pages and watch my teenage self document the slow burn of realization, the gradual understanding that what I felt for Julian was different from anything I had experienced before. Different from the crushes I had harbored on girls, the dutiful attempts at heterosexual attraction that felt more like performance than genuine desire. November 2nd, 2008. Julian kissed me today. Actually kissed me, not just for the scene, but for real. We were running lines after everyone else left, and when we got to the part where Benedict and Beatrice almost kiss, he did not pull away. His mouth was soft, and he tasted like the peppermint gum he always chews. When we broke apart, he asked if we could try it again, not for Shakespeare, but for us. I could not speak, so I just nodded. We kissed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My hands were shaking when I finally pulled away. He asked if I was okay, and I lied and said yes. I am not okay. I think I am falling in love with him, and I do not know what that means about who I am. The memory comes flooding back with devastating clarity. I remember the weight of that revelation, the terror and exhilaration of naming what I felt. Julian had been so gentle, so patient with my confusion, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. But I had been 17 and frightened, raised in a town where difference was tolerated at best and certainly not celebrated. November 10th, 2008. Julian said he thinks about me when we are not together. He said it quietly, almost like he was afraid I would not want to hear it, but I did want to hear it. I think about him constantly. In chemistry class, during dinner with my parents, late at night when I should be sleeping. I think about his hands when he draws, the way his hair falls across his forehead when he concentrates. I think about kissing him again and how that makes me feel like I am standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified and desperate to jump. I close the journal and lean back against the basement wall, overwhelmed by the intensity of what I had felt at 17. That boy seems like a stranger to me now, so open to possibility, so willing to risk everything for the chance at something real. When did I become so careful, so committed to safety over truth? The answer comes with painful clarity. Julian left. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, like a tide receding. After graduation, he went to art school in Boston while I stayed local for college. We promised to keep in touch, made plans to visit, spoke of a future that felt inevitable when we were 18 and immortal. But distance has a way of revealing what is sustainable and what exists only in the hothouse atmosphere of shared space and daily contact. Our phone calls became less frequent, our emails shorter and more casual. Julian stopped mentioning the things we had shared, stopped referencing the connection that had felt so monumental during our senior year. And I, terrified of being the one who wanted more, gradually stopped reaching out entirely. When I met Vanessa during my sophomore year of college, it felt like salvation. Here was someone who wanted exactly what I thought I should want: marriage, children, a life built on conventional foundations. November 25th, 2008. Julian said he loves me today. We were in his car after the cast party, and everyone else had gone home. He said it quietly, like it was a secret he had been carrying for months. I wanted to say it back, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I kissed him and hoped he would understand what I could not say aloud. He held me so carefully, like I was something precious that might break. I wish I was brave enough to tell him that I think about our future together, about what it would mean to choose this, to choose him. But I am 17 and scared, and I do not know how to be the person I think I might be. The entries continue through the winter and spring of our senior year, documenting a love affair conducted in stolen moments and careful glances. Julian and I had been so young, so certain that what we felt was forever, so unprepared for the way real life would intrude on our private world. Reading these pages now, I am struck by how much courage we had possessed without even knowing it, how willing we had been to risk everything for the chance at something extraordinary. The final entry is dated the day before graduation, June 10th, 2009. Tomorrow we graduate, and everything changes. Julian and I walked to the bridge tonight and sat there until almost midnight, not talking much, just being together while we still can. He drew a picture of me in his sketchbook, said he wanted to remember exactly how I looked in the moonlight. I told him I would never forget this year, never forget him. He said distance does not have to mean ending, that we can choose to keep what we have built. I want to believe him, but I am afraid. I am afraid of wanting something so much that losing it would break me. I am afraid of being the kind of person who needs another person the way I need him. I am afraid that love is not enough to overcome the practical realities of who we are and where we come from. I close the journal and sit in the basement silence, surrounded by the detritus of a life carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of reckoning. Upstairs, I can hear Vanessa moving around the kitchen, preparing dinner with the same quiet efficiency she brings to everything. Soon Ivy will be home from school, full of stories about friends and assignments and the small dramas of 7th grade. Soon I will be expected to resume my role as husband and father, to pretend that the past few hours have not torn open wounds I thought had healed years ago. Instead, I find myself reaching for my phone and typing a message to Julian. We need to talk about Act 3 blocking. Can you meet me at school tonight after dinner? I send it before I can second-guess myself, then sit in the basement holding my phone like evidence of a crime I am about to commit. His response comes within minutes. Of course, I will be there at 8. Dinner passes in a haze of domestic normalcy. Vanessa talks about a new exhibit the library is planning, something about local history and the importance of preserving community stories. Ivy describes her science project on renewable energy sources, her enthusiasm infectious as she explains the mechanics of solar panels. I nod and smile and make appropriate responses while part of my mind remains in that basement, surrounded by journals full of a love I had been too afraid to claim. At 7:30, I tell Vanessa I need to go back to school for a production meeting. She looks up from the dishes with mild curiosity, but does not ask questions. Over the years, she has learned to accept my theater schedule without complaint, has grown accustomed to evenings when the play takes precedence over family time. I kiss her cheek and tell Ivy to finish her homework before watching television, then drive through the October darkness toward a conversation I should have had 15 years ago. Julian is waiting in the auditorium when I arrive, sitting in the front row with a cup of coffee from the faculty lounge. He has changed into jeans and a dark blue sweater that makes his eyes look almost black in the stage lights. When he sees me, he stands with careful precision, as if movement itself requires conscious thought. I thought we could walk through the garden scenes, I say, my voice echoing in the empty space. Make sure the sight lines work from every angle. Julian nods and follows me onto the stage, but neither of us makes any move to begin blocking. Instead, we stand among the painted flats and constructed walls of his garden set, surrounded by the physical manifestation of a dream I described when we were teenagers. The irony is not lost on either of us. You kept the sketch, I say finally, because someone needs to acknowledge what we are really doing here, the careful dance we have been performing around the edges of truth. Julian's smile is sad and knowing. I kept a lot of things, he says. Your sketch was not the only one. He moves to his equipment bag and pulls out a worn portfolio, the same leather case he carried in high school, but battered now with years of professional use. Inside are dozens of drawings, sketches dating back to our senior year and continuing through the years since. Portraits of me at 17, captured in profile during rehearsal. The auditorium from different angles, preserved in careful pencil lines. studies of hands and faces, and the particular quality of light that filters through high windows on October afternoons. I drew you for years, Julian says, his voice steady but quiet. Even after you stopped calling, even after I realized you had chosen a different life. I could not seem to stop seeing you in everything I designed, every garden I created. You became my reference point for beauty. The admission hangs in the air between us, devastating in its honesty. Julian has spent 15 years carrying our connection with him, nurturing it through careful observation and artistic expression while I buried it beneath layers of denial and conventional choices. The weight of that dedication, that faithfulness to something I abandoned, makes it hard to breathe. Why did you come back? I ask, though I am not sure I want to hear the answer. Julian closes the portfolio and looks at me directly, the same steady gaze that used to make me feel transparent at 18. My father had a stroke last spring, he says. Mild, but enough to make me realize he would not be around forever. I took a leave from the theater in Hartford and came home to help him recover. When the Arts Council contacted me about this project, I thought it might be a sign. A sign of what? That some stories do not end just because we stop telling them. We stand in the garden he has built for me, surrounded by painted olive trees and climbing roses that exist only because I once described them to him in the front seat of his car. The work lights cast harsh shadows across his face, but I can see the careful hope there, the patient certainty of someone who has waited a long time for this moment. You are married, he says, and it is not a question but an acknowledgement of the complications that separate us. You have a daughter, a life here. I am not asking you to abandon anything. What are you asking? Julian steps closer, close enough that I can smell his cologne and see the fine lines that age has drawn around his eyes. I am asking you to stop pretending that what we had meant nothing. I am asking you to acknowledge that some connections do not disappear just because they become inconvenient. My heart is racing in a way that reminds me of being 17 and standing on that cliff edge, terrified and desperate to jump. Julian's presence fills the space between us, solid and real, and utterly different from the careful distance I have maintained with everyone else for the past 15 years. He represents everything I walked away from, everything I convinced myself I did not need. The scene calls for a kiss, I say, referencing the script, though we both know I am talking about something much larger than Shakespeare's stage directions. Yes, Julian says. It does. This time, when he reaches for me, I do not pull away. His hand finds my face exactly as it did the night before, thumb tracing the line of my jaw with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. But where yesterday's touch had been a question, tonight it feels like a recognition, an acknowledgement of what we have been circling around since the moment he walked back into my life. The kiss, when it comes, tastes like coming home. Like 15 years of careful forgetting dissolving in the space of a heartbeat. Julian's mouth is warm and patient and familiar, exactly as I remember, but deeper somehow, informed by the men we have become rather than the boys we were. I lose myself in the sensation, in the way he holds me as if I might disappear, in the realization that this feeling, this connection, has been waiting beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life all along. When we break apart, I am trembling. Julian keeps his hands on my face, studying my expression with the intensity of an artist memorizing light. I wanted to be your first, he says, his voice so quiet I have to strain to hear it. But not your last lie. The words hit me like cold water. I step back, breaking contact, suddenly aware of where I am and what I am doing. The wedding ring on my finger catches the stage lights, a circle of gold that feels heavier than it did an hour ago. Vanessa is at home grading papers or helping Ivy with homework, trusting me to be exactly where I said I would be. My life, my carefully ordered life, is built on the foundation of being someone I am not. I cannot do this, I say, backing toward the edge of the stage. Not like this. Not while I am lying to everyone who matters to me. Julian does not follow, does not try to convince me to stay. He simply watches as I gather my things with shaking hands. As I flee the garden he built for me like a coward afraid of his own desires. At the auditorium door, I turned back to see him standing alone among the set pieces, hands in his pockets, looking exactly like the boy I fell in love with and ran away from 17 years ago. I drive home through empty streets, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turn white, trying to process what just happened and what it means for everything I thought I knew about myself. The taste of Julian's kiss lingers on my lips, evidence of a truth I am not ready to acknowledge, proof that some hungers cannot be satisfied by substitution or denial. At home, Vanessa is reading in bed, her auburn hair spread across the pillowcase like silk. She looks up when I enter and asks how the production meeting went. Fine, I tell her, avoiding her eyes as I undress. Just technical details. She nods and returns to her book, and I lie awake beside her until dawn, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how a single kiss can unmake 15 years of careful construction. In the darkness, I can still feel Julian's hands on my face, can still hear him saying that he wanted to be my first but not my last lie. The truth of those words settles over me like a weight I will have to carry, the knowledge that everything I have built my life around has been a careful performance designed to avoid exactly this moment of recognition. I have been lying to Vanessa, to Ivy, to myself, pretending that safety and love are the same thing, that a life without risk is a life worth living. But Julian's return has stripped away those comfortable illusions, leaving me face to face with the person I might have been if I had been brave enough to choose truth over convenience all those years ago. The transformation has begun, slow and inexorable as sunrise, and I know there is no going back to the careful ignorance I have cultivated for so long. Julian has seen through to the heart of me, has reminded me of what it feels like to be known completely, and that knowledge will change everything, whether I am ready for it or not. I wake before dawn with Julian's words echoing in my mind. Not your last lie. The phrase has taken root in my chest, growing like something malignant, spreading through every careful justification I have built around my life. I slip out of bed without waking Vanessa and dress in the darkness, moving through the house like a ghost of myself. The October air is sharp with the promise of winter, leaves crackling beneath my feet as I walk through streets that feel both familiar and foreign. I have no destination in mind, only the need to move, to breathe, to escape the suffocating weight of recognition that has settled over me since last night. My feet carry me past sleeping houses where normal people live normal lives, where marriages exist without the constant undercurrent of deception, where love does not require such careful performance. I find myself at the old stone bridge that spans Miller's Creek, the same spot where Julian and I used to sit after rehearsal during our senior year. The water below moves slowly in the pre-dawn darkness, reflecting the last of the streetlights like scattered stars. This bridge was our sanctuary then, a place where we could be honest with each other away from the careful observation of parents and teachers and classmates who might ask uncomfortable questions. The memory comes with devastating clarity. It was here, on this exact bridge, that Julian first kissed me outside the context of theatrical necessity. We had been sitting on the stone railing, shoulders touching, talking about our plans after graduation. The conversation had turned serious, weighted with the knowledge that time was running out, that the protective bubble of high school would soon burst and scatter us in different directions. Julian had fallen quiet, studying my face in the amber glow of the streetlight. Then he leaned forward and kissed me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. When we broke apart, he whispered against my lips, "I did not think it would feel like this." His voice had been full of wonder, as if he had discovered something miraculous and unexpected. I never replied. I was 17 and terrified and completely unprepared for the magnitude of what I felt. Instead, I kissed him again, trying to communicate through touch what I could not say with words. We sat on that bridge until nearly midnight, talking about everything except the thing that mattered most, the way we felt about each other and what that might mean for our carefully planned futures. Now, 18 years later, I sit in the same spot and finally understand what Julian had been trying to tell me. He had not expected love to feel so enormous, so consuming, so utterly different from anything he had imagined. And I, too young and too scared to recognize the gift he was offering, had retreated into silence rather than risk the vulnerability that truth requires. The sun rises as I walk home, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that remind me of Julian's garden backdrop. By the time I reach my house, Vanessa is awake and moving through her morning routine with practiced efficiency. She glances up when I enter, eyebrows raised in mild curiosity. "You are up early," she says, pouring coffee into the travel mug she takes to work each morning. "Could not sleep," I tell her, which is true enough to avoid being an outright lie. "Needed some air." She nods and does not press for details, a courtesy I have always appreciated and now realize might be a symptom of the careful distance we maintain even in our most intimate moments. We move around each other in the kitchen like dancers who have learned the choreography, so while they no longer need to think about the steps, never touching, never quite connecting. After she leaves for work and Ivy catches the school bus, I remember the design notes Julian left in the auditorium. Technical specifications for the garden walls, lighting plots for the final scene, details that need to be delivered to complete the production timeline. I could email them, or wait until our next scheduled meeting, but instead I find myself driving towards Sycamore Street with the folder on my passenger seat. The Reeves house looks smaller in daylight, its blue paint more faded than I remembered. The front porch sags slightly, and the hedge that once provided privacy has grown wild and unkempt. Julian's Honda sits in the driveway next to his father's old pickup, both vehicles wearing the particular patina of New England winters. I sit in my car for several minutes, gathering courage for a conversation I am not sure how to navigate. Julian's father answers the door on the second knock, moving slowly but with the careful precision of someone determined to maintain independence despite advancing age. Robert Reeves was always a small man, but illness has made him seem almost fragile, his cardigan hanging loose on his diminished frame. His eyes, however, remain sharp and inquisitive, the same intelligent brown as his son's. "Mr. Morrison," he says, and his face brightens with genuine pleasure. "Julian told me you were directing the play. What a lovely coincidence that you two are working together again." I explain about the forgotten design notes, the need to coordinate technical details before the final rehearsals. Robert invites me in with the graciousness of someone genuinely pleased to have company, leading me through a house that feels suspended in time. The furniture is the same as I remember from high school visits, though everything seems more worn now, more fragile. "Julian is at the hardware store," Robert explains as he settles into his recliner with careful movements. "Should be back within the hour. You are welcome to wait, or I can make sure he gets the folder." I should leave the notes and go, should maintain the careful boundaries that have kept my two lives separate for so long. Instead, I hear myself accepting his offer of coffee, settling into the familiar living room where Julian and I used to do homework and pretend we were just friends. Robert moves slowly but purposefully, clearly pleased to have a guest to fuss over. As he prepares coffee in the kitchen, he calls out questions about the production, about my family, about life in the years since Julian moved away for college. His genuine interest feels like a balm after the careful politeness that characterizes most of my social interactions. When he returns with coffee in mismatched mugs, he settles back into his chair and studies me with the same direct gaze I remember from 18 years ago. "You know," he says thoughtfully, "Julian has talked about you over the years. Not often, but when he did, there was something in his voice. A kind of sadness, maybe, or regret." I nearly choke on my coffee, unprepared for such directness. Robert continues, oblivious to my discomfort. "He never brought anyone home, you see. Not in all these years. Oh, there were relationships, I am sure. A man does not reach his age without some romantic history, but never anyone serious enough to introduce to his old father. Just work and art and what he called his ghosts." The words hang in the air between us, loaded with implication. Robert's expression remains benign, but I sense a deeper understanding in his eyes, a recognition of something he has perhaps suspected for years but never voiced directly. "I always wondered," he continues carefully, "what happened between you boys senior year. Julian was different after graduation, more serious somehow. like he had lost something important and was still learning how to live without it. The honesty in his voice makes my chest tight with guilt. Here is a man who loves his son enough to notice the subtle changes that grief can carve into a person's character. Here is someone who has been watching Julian carry the weight of our unfinished story for 18 years without ever knowing the details. We were just friends, I say finally, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. Robert nods slowly, but his expression suggests he finds my explanation incomplete. Perhaps, he says, but friendship can be its own kind of love, can it not? And love, whatever form it takes, deserves honesty. I finish my coffee in uncomfortable silence, hyper-aware of the way Robert's words seem to echo Julian's accusation about lies and truth. When Julian's Honda pulls into the driveway 20 minutes later, I feel both relief and a familiar spike of anxiety. Through the window, I watch him gather packages from the hardware store, moving with the careful efficiency I remember from high school. He looks surprised to see my car in the driveway, but not displeased. When he enters the house, his eyes find mine immediately, and I see the question there. Are you here because of last night? Are you ready to continue the conversation we started in the garden set? I hold up the folder of design notes, a convenient excuse that feels increasingly flimsy under his steady gaze. You left these at school, I say. Thought you might need them for the final construction details. Julian accepts the folder with a small nod, but makes no move to open it. His father watches this exchange with poorly concealed interest, clearly sensing undercurrents he cannot quite identify. The three of us sit in the living room for another 15 minutes, making polite conversation about the play and the weather and anything except the tension that fills the space between Julian and me like a physical presence. When I finally make my excuses to leave, Robert insists on walking me to the door. At the threshold, he places a gentle hand on my arm. His touch is light as paper, but somehow weighted with years of accumulated wisdom. It is never too late to tell the truth, he says quietly, his voice pitched low enough that Julian cannot hear from the living room. Whatever happened between you boys, whatever was left unsaid, there is still time to make it right. I drive home through afternoon streets that feel dreamlike, Robert's words joining Julian's in the chorus of accusations that seem to follow me everywhere now. The careful life I have built suddenly feels as fragile as tissue paper, constructed from denials and half-truths that cannot bear the weight of honest examination. That evening, after Ivy has gone to bed and Vanessa has settled into her reading chair with a mystery novel, I sit at my desk in the home office and pull out a sheet of blank paper. I do not know who I am writing to. Julian, myself, the 17-year-old boy who was too afraid to claim what he wanted. The words come slowly at first, then in a rush of honesty that feels like bleeding. Dear Julian, I begin, then cross it out. Dear self. Dear ghost. Dear boy I used to be. I write about the bridge and the taste of his kiss and the way he whispered that he had not expected it to feel like this. I write about the terror I felt at 17, the absolute certainty that love like ours was too dangerous to survive in a world that barely tolerated difference. I write about meeting Vanessa and the relief of finding someone who made me feel normal, acceptable, worthy of the suburban life I thought I should want. I write about the years of marriage that feel more like friendship, about the careful distance I maintain from everyone to avoid being truly seen. I write about the photographs hidden on my bookshelf and the journals buried in my basement, and the way I have spent 15 years trying to forget the most honest thing I have ever felt. The letter grows to 3 pages, then 4, my handwriting becoming looser as the words pour out of me like water from a broken dam. I write until my hand cramps and my eyes burn with exhaustion, until every secret I have carried feels exposed on the page like an anatomy lesson in emotional archaeology. When I finish, I fold the letter carefully and place it in my desk drawer. I will never send it, never show it to anyone, but writing it feels like a small act of courage, a recognition that truth exists even when it remains unspoken. For the first time in years, I weep, not the careful tears of acceptable grief, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone finally confronting the magnitude of what they have lost. Vanessa finds me there an hour later, sitting at my desk with my head in my hands and the evidence of my breakdown scattered around me like debris. She does not ask questions, does not demand explanations. Instead, she sits on the edge of my desk and waits with the patience of someone who has been expecting this moment for years. When I finally look up at her, I see not anger or surprise, but a kind of resigned sadness, as if she has been watching me struggle with something she could not name, but always knew was there. Something happened at rehearsal, I tell her, the words coming out broken and uneven. With Julian. Something I was not prepared for. I expect shock, accusations, the righteous anger of a wife betrayed. Instead, Vanessa nods slowly, her expression more thoughtful than wounded. I know, she says simply. I have always known, I think. You were somewhere else long before Julian showed up. I just did not know where. Her honesty cuts deeper than anger would have, revealing the careful performance we have both been maintaining for years. She has known about the distance between us, has felt the absence of real intimacy, even if she could not identify its source. She has built her life around loving someone who could never love her completely, and she has done it with grace and patience and a kind of quiet dignity that makes me feel ashamed of my cowardice. We sit in the office together as the house settles around us, two people finally acknowledging what we have spent years pretending not to see. The silence between us deepens, filled with all the things we have never said, all the ways we have failed each other through careful omission rather than outright cruelty. I do not know what happens next, I tell her finally. Vanessa reaches over and touches my hand briefly, a gesture of comfort rather than possession. Neither do I, she says. But lying about it will not make it easier. After she goes to bed, I remain at my desk for hours, staring at the drawer that contains my letter to Julian and trying to understand how telling the truth can feel simultaneously like salvation and destruction. Tomorrow I will have to face rehearsal. We'll have to pretend that nothing has changed while everything continues to shift beneath my feet like sand. The transformation Julian spoke of has begun, slow and inexorable as erosion, and I realize there is no path back to the careful ignorance I have cultivated for so long. Truth, once acknowledged, demands its own continuation, and I am no longer sure I have the strength to resist its pull. Opening night arrives with the particular electricity that only live theater can generate. The auditorium fills slowly as 7 o'clock approaches, families and friends and community members settling into folding chairs that have been transformed by anticipation into something approaching grandeur. I stand in the wings watching the audience gather, noting familiar faces from around town, teachers from school, parents I recognize from Ivy's soccer games and school concerts. Vanessa sits in the third row, wearing the navy dress she saves for special occasions, her program folded neatly in her lap. She catches my eye from across the auditorium and offers a small wave, a gesture so normal it makes my chest tight with the knowledge of what I am about to destroy. Beside her, Ivy bounces slightly in her seat, excited to see her father's work come to life on the stage where she performed as a tree just 2 years ago. The students move through their pre-show rituals with the focused energy of young performers who have worked hard and are ready to share what they have created. Emma adjusts her costume one final time, the flowing gown that transforms her into hero looking more elegant than anything a 17-year-old should be able to wear with such confidence. Marcus practices his lines under his breath, lips moving silently as he runs through Benedict's longer speeches. In the back corner of the backstage area, Julian makes final adjustments to a set piece, his movements economical and precise. He wears all black as stage crew traditionally do, but even in the shadows he commands attention in a way that reminds me of how magnetic he was at 18. When our eyes meet across the controlled chaos of opening night preparation, he nods once, a gesture that acknowledges both our professional collaboration and the personal undercurrents that have made this production unlike any other I have directed. The house lights dim, and conversation fades to expectant silence. I take my position in the back of the auditorium, script in hand, though I know every line by heart after weeks of rehearsal. This is the moment when months of work either crystallize into magic or fall apart under the pressure of live performance. Tonight, I can feel the difference in the air, the particular tension that comes when everything is about to change. The play unfolds with a beauty that exceeds my highest hopes. The students have found something in these weeks of rehearsal, a confidence and connection that transforms Shakespeare's words from academic exercise into living truth. The comedy sparkles with genuine wit. The romantic confusion feels authentic rather than forced, and Julian's garden set provides a backdrop so lush and inviting that the audience seems to lean forward, drawn into the world we have created together. Emma and Marcus have grown into their roles in ways that surprise even me. Their chemistry as Hero and Claudio carries the weight of young love without the self-consciousness that often plagues high school productions. When the moment comes for their characters to confess their feelings, to move from mistaken identity to honest recognition, they handle it with the kind of natural grace that makes live theater feel like witnessing real life unfold. But it is the other couple, the students playing Benedict and Beatrice, who stop my breath entirely. Sarah Chun and David Kim have found something in their antagonistic characters that goes beyond mere performance. Their verbal sparring crackles with the particular electricity that comes when two people are falling in love while pretending to hate each other. When they reach the final scene, the moment when all pretense falls away and truth must be spoken aloud, they approach it with a fearlessness that makes me remember what courage looked like before I learned to be afraid. The kiss, when it comes, is perfect. Not technically perfect. Sarah is slightly too tall and David has to stand on his toes to reach her properly, but perfect in its honesty, its complete commitment to the moment Shakespeare has written for them. They hold each other as if they have discovered something miraculous, and the audience responds with the kind of absolute silence that comes when everyone in the room recognizes they are witnessing something real. I watch from the back of the auditorium and feel 15 years of careful distance collapse into nothing. These two teenagers, barely older than Julian and I were when we first performed this play, have found the courage to be completely present in their moment of connection. They do not pull away or make excuses or retreat into safety. They simply love each other, publicly and without apology, in a way that Julian and I never managed despite feeling everything they are pretending to feel. When the scene ends and the audience erupts into applause, I see Vanessa clapping with genuine enthusiasm, her face bright with the particular joy that comes from watching young people discover themselves through art. She looks proud, and I realize she is proud of me, of the work I have done to guide these students towards something beautiful. The knowledge that I am about to break her heart sits like a stone in my chest. The final scene plays out with the same magical quality that has characterized the entire production. The garden comes alive under Julian's carefully designed lighting, creating the illusion that we are truly in an Italian villa where love and laughter can triumph over confusion and fear. When the last line is spoken and the final bow is taken, the audience rises in sustained applause that feels like a gift. Backstage afterward, the controlled chaos of a successful opening night unfolds in familiar patterns. Students embrace each other with the particular intensity of people who have shared something transcendent. Parents arrive with flowers and cameras, ready to celebrate their children's achievement. I move through the crowd accepting congratulations and offering praise, playing my role as the dedicated director who has guided this production to success. But my attention keeps drifting to Julian, who moves efficiently through the backstage area collecting his tools and sketches. He works with the methodical precision of someone preparing to leave, and I realize with sudden clarity that he intends to disappear again, to pack up his contribution to this production and return to whatever life he has built in the years since high school. The crowd begins to thin as families drift toward the lobby for the reception the Arts Council has organized. Students change out of their costumes and gather their belongings, high on the adrenaline of successful performance and reluctant to let the evening end. I should join the reception, should shake hands and accept compliments and bask in the glow of work well done. Instead, I find myself walking toward the corner where Julian is folding his sketches into neat piles. "You are leaving," I say, and it is not a question. Julian looks up from his packing, his expression carefully neutral. My work here is finished, he says. The set served its purpose. Time to strike it and move on to the next project. He reaches for his portfolio, the same worn leather case that held 15 years of sketches documenting his faithfulness to a connection I had convinced myself was over. The gesture feels final in a way that makes my chest tight with panic. This is the moment I realize. This is when I either let him walk away again or find the courage to claim what we have both been circling around since he returned. Julian, I say, and my voice comes out smaller than intended. He pauses, sketch still in hand, and looks at me with the same steady gaze that used to make me feel transparent at 18. The words I need to say feel enormous, too large for my throat, but I force them out anyway. We were not practicing, I tell him. Back then, in high school, what we felt, what we did together. It was never just for the play. Julian sets down his sketch and steps closer, close enough that I can see the fine lines around his eyes, the gray at his temples that speaks of the years we have spent apart. When he speaks, his voice is quiet but certain. I know, he says, and those two words contain everything we have never been able to acknowledge directly. The love we felt at 18, the connection that survived 15 years of careful burial, the recognition that some truths cannot be destroyed by denial or distance. The backstage area has emptied around us, leaving only the ghost lights and the scattered detritus of successful performance. In the distance, I can hear laughter from the reception, the sound of community celebrating something beautiful we have helped create. But here, in this space between Julian and me, time feels suspended, waiting for me to make the choice I should have made 18 years ago. I reach for him then, my hand finding his face exactly as he had touched mine the night we kissed in his garden set. His skin is warm beneath my palm, real and present, and utterly different from the careful distance I have maintained with everyone else for years. When I lean forward to kiss him, he meets me halfway, and the connection feels like coming home to a place I had convinced myself I no longer needed. This time, when we break apart, I do not run. I stay present in the moment, in the recognition of what we are to each other, in the knowledge that some connections are too fundamental to be severed by time or fear or the practical considerations that have governed my adult life. But with that recognition comes another, heavier truth. I cannot continue living the careful lie my life has become. I cannot keep pretending that safety and love are the same thing, that a marriage built on gratitude rather than passion is fair to anyone involved. If I am going to choose Julian, if I am going to choose truth, then I must also choose the destruction of everything I have built around its absence. The drive home passes in a blur of familiar streets that feel foreign now, as if I am seeing them for the first time or perhaps the last. The house sits quietly in its pool of porch light, waiting for me to return from what Vanessa assumes was a successful evening of professional achievement. She has no idea that I am coming home to dismantle the life we have built together, to tell our daughter goodbye, to honor the truth I should have claimed years ago. Inside, Ivy waits in the living room, still wearing her good dress from the play, her face bright with excitement about what she has witnessed. She throws her arms around me in congratulation, chattering about her favorite scenes and how proud she is of what I have accomplished. Her enthusiasm is pure and uncomplicated, and I hold her longer than usual, memorizing the weight of her embrace before I destroy her understanding of who her father is. We need to talk, I tell her gently, leading her to the couch, where we have shared countless conversations about homework and friends and the small dramas of growing up. Tonight, I must tell her about a much larger drama, one that will change everything she thought she knew about her family. The conversation is harder than anything I have ever had to do. I try to find words that a 12-year-old can understand, ways to explain that sometimes people discover truths about themselves that require difficult choices. I tell her that her mother and I love her beyond measure, that nothing about our love for her will change, but that we have realized we cannot continue being married to each other. She cries, of course. She asks the questions any child would ask. Why now? Why this way? Whether there is anything she could have done differently. I hold her and promise that none of this is her fault, that sometimes adults have to make choices that hurt in the short term but lead to greater honesty in the long term. I tell her that I am moving out, that we will arrange everything so she feels secure and loved, that being truthful about who we are will ultimately make all of us happier. When she finally falls asleep, exhausted by emotion and the late hour, Vanessa and I sit at the kitchen table where we have shared thousands of meals and conversations. The silence between us feels different now, not the careful distance we have maintained for years, but something deeper, more honest, tinged with the sadness of ending something that was never quite right, but was built with good intentions. Vanessa reaches across the table and takes my hand, her fingers cool and familiar against my palm. Her touch carries no anger, no accusation, only the weight of shared history and mutual recognition of what we are about to lose. It is not just about who you love, she says quietly, her voice steady despite the tears that trace silent paths down her cheeks. It is about who you become when you stop hiding. Her words cut straight through to the heart of everything I have been avoiding for 15 years. She understands, has perhaps always understood, that my distance from her was not about her inadequacy, but about my inability to be fully present when so much of myself was buried beneath layers of denial and fear. We cry together then, mourning the marriage we are ending not with resentment, but with a kind of gentle grief for the people we have been and the future we had planned together. There is love in our tears, recognition of the genuine affection we have shared, even if it was never the consuming passion that both of us deserved. She tells me she has suspected for years that there was someone else, some part of my heart that belonged to a story I never shared with her. She says she chose to ignore it because what we had felt stable and good, because she loved the family we built together even if the foundation was not entirely solid. I apologize for the years of careful distance, for making her love someone who could never love her completely in return. She tells me there is nothing to forgive, that we both did the best we could with the understanding we had at the time. She says she wants me to be happy, truly happy, in a way she now realizes I never was during our marriage. As dawn approaches, we make practical plans about custody and living arrangements, about how to tell our families and friends, about the careful work of dismantling a shared life with as much grace as we can manage. Through it all, Vanessa maintains the dignity and kindness that made me grateful to marry her 15 years ago, even if I now understand that gratitude was never enough. When the sun rises over our quiet street, I pack a single bag with clothes and necessities, leaving behind the accumulated possessions of 15 years of marriage. The life I built here, the careful performance of normalcy, feels like something that belonged to someone else, a man who was too afraid to claim his own truth. At the door, Vanessa kisses my cheek one final time, a gesture of farewell that acknowledges both what we are losing and what we are choosing to find. "Take care of yourself," she says, "and be happy. You deserve to be happy." I drive toward Julian's house through streets that look different in morning light, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the knowledge that truth, however costly, is the only foundation on which real love can be built. Behind me, the life I lived for 15 years fades into memory. Ahead, the future waits like an unwritten script, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. Julian is waiting on his front porch when I arrive, as if he has been expecting me since the moment I left the auditorium last night. He sits on the steps in the early morning light, still wearing the black clothes from the production, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that steams in the cool air. When he sees my car pull into the driveway, he does not look surprised, only tired in the way of someone who has been awake all night thinking about impossible choices and inevitable conclusions. I walk toward him across the uneven lawn, carrying nothing but the weight of what I have just done and the strange lightness that comes with finally telling the truth. The October air is sharp with the promise of winter, and somewhere in the distance a dog barks as the neighborhood begins to wake. Normal sounds from a normal morning, though nothing about this moment feels ordinary to me. "We need to talk," I say when I reach the porch steps, and Julian nods as if this conversation has been scheduled for 18 years and we are finally keeping the appointment. He pours coffee from a thermos into a second mug, adding cream without asking how I like it, because he still remembers. We sit on the porch steps in the growing light, Two men in their 30s drinking coffee and watching a town wake up around us. The silence between us feels different from the careful distance we have maintained for weeks. Heavier with possibility, lighter with the absence of pretense. I told them, I say finally. Vanessa and Ivy. Everything. Julian sets down his mug and looks at me directly, the same steady gaze that used to make me feel seen and terrified in equal measure. How did they take it? He asks, and his voice carries genuine concern for people he barely knows, but who have been shaped by choices we made long ago. I tell him about Ivy's tears and questions, about Vanessa's grace and understanding, about the careful way we dismantled 15 years of shared life in the space of a single conversation. Julian listens without judgment, without the impatience of someone who has waited years for this moment and wants to rush toward its resolution. He simply receives the story of what my honesty has cost, what it has given, what it means for the future we might finally be able to build together. When I finish talking, Julian reaches for my hand with the same careful reverence he showed when we were teenagers discovering what it meant to love someone completely. His fingers are warm despite the morning chill, real and present, and utterly different from the careful distance I have maintained with everyone else for so many years. Are you sure? He asks quietly. About this, about us, about what you are choosing to lose. The question deserves honesty, and I give him the only truth I have. I am terrified, I tell him. I have no idea what comes next or how to build a life that does not require constant performance. But I am sure about you, about us, about the way I feel when you look at me like you can see straight through to who I really am. We sit on the porch until the sun climbs high enough to warm the air, talking about practical things and impossible dreams with equal weight. Julian tells me about his work in Hartford, about the theater where he has spent 5 years designing worlds for other people's stories. I tell him about the apartment I will need to find, about the custody arrangements that will shape my relationship with Ivy, about the careful work of learning to live authentically after decades of careful construction. The conversation feels both monumental and utterly ordinary. Two people planning a future they never thought they would be brave enough to claim. There is no dramatic declaration of love, no passionate reconciliation scene worthy of the stage. Instead, there is just the quiet recognition of what we have always been to each other, what we might become if we can learn to choose truth over safety on a daily basis. 3 weeks later, I sit alone in the high school auditorium on a Thursday afternoon, the same space where this story began and ended and began again. The much ado sets have been struck, the garden walls and painted backdrops carefully stored until the next production needs them. The stage is bare now except for a few music stands and the ghost light that keeps watch when the building sleeps. I hold a new script in my hands, photocopied pages still warm from the machine. Angels in America. Kushner's epic about love and politics and the courage required to keep living when the world seems determined to break your heart. The drama department has never attempted anything so ambitious, so explicitly political, so unafraid of the complexities that come with loving someone the world does not expect you to love. 6 months ago, I would never have considered directing this play. Too controversial, too risky, too likely to make parents and administrators uncomfortable with questions they preferred not to answer. But 6 months ago, I was a different person, someone who chose safety over truth so consistently that I had forgotten the difference between the two. The auditorium door opens with its familiar creak, and Julian walks in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the new place downtown. He has been living with his father for the past month, helping with physical therapy and gradually introducing the idea that he might stay in town permanently instead of returning to Hartford. The conversation with Robert about his son's happiness, about love in all its forms, went better than either of us expected. Julian hands me a coffee and settles into the seat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touch. He does not ask about the script or why I am sitting alone in an empty auditorium on a Thursday afternoon. He simply waits with the patience he has always possessed, the ability to be present without demanding explanations or pushing for more than I am ready to give. The coffee is perfect, cream and sugar in exactly the proportions I prefer. Such a small thing, being known well enough that someone remembers how you take your coffee, but it feels enormous after years of being married to someone who never quite learned the details that make up daily tenderness. I am thinking about directing this, I tell him, holding up the script. Something different, something honest. Something that does not require anyone to pretend they are someone else. Julian reads the title and nods slowly, understanding immediately why this play calls to me now. It is a story about men who love each other in a world that punishes such love, about the choice between hiding and surviving authentically, about the way truth can be both devastating and redemptive. The school board will probably say no, I continue. Too political, too challenging for high school students. But I want to ask anyway. I want to see what happens when we stop making decisions based on what other people are ready to hear. Julian reaches for my hand then. Not the careful, questioning touch of our first reunion, but something sure and settled. The gesture of someone who knows exactly what he is choosing and why. His fingers intertwine with mine with familiar precision, and I realize this is what I have been missing for 15 years. The simple pleasure of being touched by someone who knows me completely. We sit in the auditorium as afternoon light slants through the high windows. Two men holding hands in a space where we first discovered what it meant to love each other. The silence between us is comfortable now, full of shared understanding rather than the careful distance that used to define every interaction. Are you happy? Julian asks eventually, and the question carries weight beyond its simple words. He is asking about the choice I made, about the life I left behind, about whether truth has proven worth its considerable cost. I consider the question seriously, thinking about the small apartment I rented on the other side of town, about the custody schedule that gives me Ivy every other weekend and one evening a week, about the careful work of rebuilding relationships damaged by years of emotional distance. I think about the way Vanessa looked when she signed the divorce papers, sad but not angry, resigned to ending something that was never quite right despite everyone's best intentions. Yes, I tell him finally. For the first time in 15 years, I am happy. Not constantly, not without complications or moments of doubt, but genuinely, authentically happy in a way that requires no performance or careful management. Julian squeezes my hand, and we return to comfortable silence, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light. Somewhere in the building, a door closes with a distant echo. In a few hours, students will flood these hallways with their noise and energy and endless possibilities. Tomorrow, I will submit my proposal for Angels in America and wait to see whether the administration is ready for the kind of honesty that makes some people uncomfortable. But right now, in this moment, there is only this. Two people who found their way back to each other after 18 years of careful forgetting, sitting in the space where their story began and holding hands like teenagers who have finally learned they do not need to be afraid of what they feel. The ghost light hums softly from the stage, a single bright spot in the gathering shadows. It will burn all night, keeping watch over this empty space until tomorrow brings new stories, new possibilities, new chances for people to discover who they really are when they stop pretending to be someone else. I look at Julian's profile in the golden light and think about all the years we lost to fear and convention and the careful choice of safety over truth. There is grief in that recognition, mourning for the life we might have built if we had been braver at 18. But there is also gratitude for the chance to begin again, to write a better ending to a story we thought was finished. Julian turns toward me and smiles. The same expression that made my heart race when we were teenagers fumbling through Shakespeare's words and discovering that some emotions cannot be faked. His thumb traces across my knuckles with familiar tenderness, and I realize that this is what love looks like when it is no longer afraid of itself. Ordinary gestures made extraordinary by their complete honesty. Outside, the October afternoon fades toward evening, and the world continues its ancient rotation. But here, in this auditorium where we first learned what it meant to be seen completely by another person, time feels suspended, full of the particular grace that comes when two people finally stop running from what they have always known to be true. Something is beginning here, something that requires no rehearsal because it is built on the foundation of recognition rather than performance. We are not playing roles or following a script written by someone else's expectations. We are simply ourselves, finally, completely, without apology or explanation. The spotlight burns steady on the empty stage, and Julian does not let go of my hand.